Okay. I think the nice weather is affecting how slowly people roll in here today. It's beautiful weather out there, you know? It's too nice. All right, good morning, everyone. We'll go ahead and get started. Try to keep us on time. I want to thank everybody for showing up on this lovely spring day in Dayton, Ohio. It's beautiful weather out there. We have a very good agenda for all of us. I'm going to review it for a few minutes, and then we'll go ahead and get started. We'll start with our review of the building repair costs today. So Dr. Sheila Burton will be presenting to us. Then we really wanted to take a look at the city development projects around the areas of our schools that are under-enrolled, and Shell Dickstein will do that. After that, we're going to break into small groups where we're going to be discussing 3 questions that or 4 questions that we'll be asking each group to report back to us on to help the superintendent focus her recommendation to the board. And then after that, we'll wrap it up. It should be a very short and sweet meeting today, and we'll try to get you out of here on time. Jeff, you have anything else to say?
Just a couple of things. Just want to say, first of all, thank you very much, Mohammed, for getting us started. Ms. Dickstein, our city manager, is on the way. She's had some adjustment with her boot on her foot, but she's hobbling down the highway here. One of the things that we just want to share with you that there are a variety of projects that we're working on throughout different parts of the community. And we think it's very important that you know where those things are taking place that are going to be affecting some of the schools. So she's going to share information with you as far as that's concerned as well. So again, thank you again for your attention. Thank you for being here. Okay, we'll kick it back off to Superintendent.
Thank you. At this time, we'd like to turn it over to Dr. Burton. She's passed out the financial assessments that have been occurring for the district in order for us to understand what we need to update, upgrade, etc. So she'll be reviewing that with us right now.
So you have before you the list of the costs. You have before you the list of the costs that we're anticipating for next year for each building. The light colors are the high schools. That's a distinction. The blue are elementary, and then yellow is Ludlow 1 and 2. The costs that we're anticipating in order to ensure that we're able to meet all of the needs of those buildings. The costs are divided into 4 categories: plumbing costs per building, HVAC, so air conditioning and heating, electrical, and then any structural issues. And then you can see the total costs. I'd just like to, I think you can look at the chart yourselves and see what our big cost areas are. For example, for the high schools, Meadowdale High School has the largest cost among the high schools. And then if you go down the sheet and take a look at Valerie, because Valerie is a legacy building, you can see what the cost is for us to do the repairs that need to occur at Valerie. And then the next biggest cost for us is this building and the building across the street. You can see the enormous costs for doing the work that needs to be done at Ludlow 1 and Ludlow 2. any questions about this sheet.
If you take a moment and just look through the sheet to familiarize yourself, because later on in the small group time, you're going to need to have kind of an understanding about this. So just take a couple of minutes, if you would, look over it, see if you have any questions that you want before we break into small groups. We can address those with you.
Dr. Burton, who provided the cost estimates here? Was it done internally, or can you give us some background just on?
And I'll have Rick Rayford, who heads that department, address that.
Yeah, these costs were actually derived from our trades workers. We took all of our trades group and all of our electricians, and we had them assess the building and assess the needs of the building. So this was done by internal staff that actually work at the buildings.
Richard?
To be done, or what's your basis, or what is the assessment, what is it comprised of?
Okay, the assessment comprises of capital costs. Some of our newer buildings, some of the devices in the newer buildings are past their life; they need to be replaced. Some of the other buildings have issues with construction that we just came across, and then the other cost is just replacement of technology. As time goes on, we have a lot of outdated infrastructure things, and that's included in that cost.
Thank you. And one other question that's related, legacy. Would you define what that is?
Legacy is some of our older buildings, which require a lot. Some of our legacy buildings, they still have asbestos and still has some environmental issues dealing with them. So that's why their costs are usually higher, because we like to try to eliminate the risk of any exposure. So that's why those costs are higher.
And also, too, if the chairman and co-chairman would allow me, perhaps there's some questions in terms of my participation here. I am in the absence of Loretta Williams.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate you clarifying that.
Could you tell us who you are?
Yes, your name, please, would be nice.
My name is Maddie White, and as I said, I am here at the request of Loretta Williams in her absence.
That's not a problem. We just want to make sure that we know
Who you are.
we know
Trying to
who
write
you
names
are,
down.
So we have a
Thank
name.
you.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Maddie is also a former employee of Dayton Public
Yes, she
Schools
is.
as well.
Thank you, Anna.
Richard had a question.
Richard?
I'm just thinking that the logical thing is some estimate of sort of lifetime present value.
Richard, can you use them? There you go.
Capital cost per building. Is there any estimate about, if we look at each of these buildings over the next 20 years? I'm just wondering why we're just looking at the 1 year. I would imagine that particular buildings have higher operational cost every year, and those may be these may be a proxy for that, but has there been some attempt to ask what the sort of overall operational and capital cost would be over a 20-year period for each of the buildings?
We currently do have a 10-year capital plan. We don't have a 20-year capital plan, but we do have a 10-year capital plan that takes in consideration the life expectancy of equipment and such forth.
So you have both that 10-year capital plan, and then you also have sort of operational costs for each building in terms of HVAC, electrical, water, et cetera?
Yes, and that generally falls into preventive maintenance. A lot of that stuff is in preventive maintenance. The capital costs are the cost of obsolete equipment that we can no longer buy parts for, or stuff or roofs that are past their life expectancy. So that's usually included in capital. The operational cost is usually preventive maintenance.
Yeah, I'm just thinking that it would be at some level better for us if we had some estimate for each building of that sort of 10-year operational and capital costs per building.
Thank you.
Just one last question. No, when we built the schools, there was a mandatory 3% that was to be used for the maintenance and upkeep of the buildings, and I'm sure that that has been exceeded. What's the gap between that amount of money in terms of what is there that's provided for in that particular bond levy that was passed and what you have currently to deal with that? Just how much do you have to subsidize additionally out of the regular general fund budget?
That would probably be a treasurer question.
Okay. Yes. Yes. Over that 3% that was mandatory as part of the construction budget.
We use the 034, so.
We don't have 3% budget. What we have is,
Can you turn on your mic, please? Thank you. The other way. There we go.
what we get for the new building is 1%, 1 mil. Out of that 1 mil, half mil goes into the new buildings, and half mil goes into that capital. And we get about $650 a year for each funds. The rest is from general fund. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Was there a warranty provided when these buildings were built by the builders, construction companies, architects?
Yes, we did have warranties for the buildings, but most of those warranties are short. They're like for 1 or 2 years.
Okay.
Some of our buildings were built maybe 10 years
10
ago.
years ago.
So, yeah.
Okay. Tom?
We're in Ludlow 1 now, correct?
Yes,
Ludlow 2 is the one across the street.
across the street. That's correct.
Is Ludlow 2 in active use a lot of the time or not?
No, it's not, sir.
Okay. So is there a way to discern what cost is really Ludlow 1 from what cost is Ludlow 2?
I would leave that to Rick and
Yeah. Yeah, we do have it broke down by Ludlow 1 and Ludlow 2. We could provide that for you.
do you have that information? Okay. That information is available, I
Ludlow
think.
2, Ludlow 2 is about $600 plus $1,000. The bulk of this cost is for Ludlow 1.
Sheila, just for clarification, are you saying 600,000 out of the 2,000,004?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
Additional questions? We good? Okay. The city manager, you up? All right, I explained that you were doing some adjustments with your boot.
Don't get my
On the
boot
way
anymore.
down.
Just an insert in my tenny. So it's a great excuse to wear tennis shoes for the next 3 months. So this morning, we wanted to spend a little bit of time with the task force talking, orientating you to developments around the 9 schools on the west side of Dayton. Really, the idea here is so that you have an idea of how strong the activity is around these assets, are the presence of other assets, whether it's businesses that have expanded or strong faith groups and institutions to that regard to partner with, and other strategic development activity around them, with the thought being that if there were discussions around a particular school being closed, you could see the activity that's occurring around that particular school, and potentially glean from that the ability to reposition that facility into the community or reuse it position it for reuse in the community. So I've asked the planning and economic development staff with city and citywide teams who implement our asset development strategies, sat down and really put together information around each of these schools, as well as brainstormed from their lens potential reuses for consideration by the task force. So I've asked John Gower to put together a presentation that he will hand out to you, and then we'll walk through quickly so that you can have a flavor of this information and use it in our future work here in this meeting.
Okay, hello. As the city manager mentioned, we're going to walk through a couple of different pieces here. The first sheet just shows the 9 schools that, based on the DPS.
Mohammed, I don't know if we have enough to hand out at this point in time. I think we were planning on following up with an electronic dispersal, but make sure that we have enough around the table first so that the task force can make notes.
Okay, so if you go ahead and open up to the first page, just in terms of locating these schools, the first 9 are schools that we took from the DPS information on schools that had under 50% 50% occupancy of the classrooms, and then the lower 7 were schools that had more than 50%. We kind of located both of these because they were in the same general geography. And I think part of the brainstorming that the team wanted to do was not only look at those schools that were under 50%, but also look at the schools that were in the similar geography. So if you go to the next sheet, there were some general comments and thoughts that I think on this sheet that were consistent through many of the schools, if not most of the schools. There were some thoughts about repurposing of schools here, and specifically, could any of these buildings be candidates for residential reuse? We think this requires architectural analytics, but I think based on our experience, we think there might be some possibility for one or more of these schools to be potentially repositioned for housing, and some of the brainstorming around that was really possibly as senior housing. The market forces, there were some thoughts from the team thinking about some of the specific locations here and market forces, because most of the schools are really embedded in residential areas. However, not all of them are specifically embedded in the middle of residential areas. There are a number of the facilities here that have locations on major thoroughfares and crossroads. For example, the Boys Academy, which is at the intersection of James H. McGee and West 3rd Street. There was a lot of conversation here about leveraging community partnering opportunities. I'm not going to go through all of these here, but I did put a bullet down here because it's going to show up on your maps. The potential partnering with neighborhood faith-based institutions for after-school programming, because there are a number of these schools that are located in communities that have pretty significant base of faith-based institutions, and therefore representing a possibility for some partnering opportunities. Co-location ideas, there's the potential discussed for opening for active programming after school hours. For example, a Y Planet Fitness or GED classes. A number of the folks were asking questions about, are there possibilities for partnering with Sinclair, Wright State, Central State, and UD adult education offerings? Would some of these locations be able to potentially function as employee training sites for local employees. And of course, probably all of these have opportunities for neighborhood and community organizations for holding meetings or possibly partnering here. Some of the other co-location ideas were, for example, someone had mentioned an art center like Rosewood. What about the possibility of maker spaces? Could some of these kitchens leverage or attract other partners based on that these are really pretty good kitchens here? Expansion of the Victory Project, that was just an example, or other similar community functions or organizations as a co-location possibility. And then these three were pretty consistent through most of the schools here: senior resources and or services, pre-K resources and or services, and administrative functions and offices. And that was basically asking questions about, are there any possibilities for DPS administrative or office functions to possibly co-locate some of these schools. Another series of thoughts that came up with this was alternative theming for one or more of these schools. And again, these are just a couple of examples here. One was STEM or STEAM, and we know a number of the middle schools, I know at least Wagaman is I believe a STEM middle school. Military, junior ROTC, accelerated academics, language immersion, school labs operated by the Schools of Education of UD, Wright State, Central State, and or St. Clair College, Community Technology Center West, vocational education focus, and service learning at a young age. So those are general comments that could be applied to most of these locations as we walk through them. So the first one, if you turn the page, is the Innovation Learning Center, and this is at the northwest corner of Abbey and 35 West. There was a school there, I think it was Jackson Elementary, that was demolished as part of the rebuild, so there's this really large, some of our folks described it as a shovel-ready site, and they saw that potentially as an idea here. So this location is on the northern edge of the choice planning area. In theory here, the choice planning focus is really south of 35, but this is close enough that it's really on the edge of it. It's centrally located in the West Dayton geography. If you zoom out and look at a map, this is really centrally located. I mentioned the Jackson School site is potential partial shovel-ready site, could complement the Home Avenue redevelopment value proposition and vision, and there are a couple of thoughts related to that, and that's the repositioning of the right factory buildings, potentially for workforce development and training functions that could complement an aviation theme. The northwest corner of Abbey and 35 could potentially be reimaged or revisioned or redeveloped as a key gateway component to complement the northeast corner of the Home Avenue site. It's got great visibility access to and from US 35. Could be potentially integrated into a larger repositioning vision exercise that might also encompass the former Arlington Greater Dayton Premier Management site, which is vacant, and the VA, because this is one cluster. There's a lot of land here that could be potentially repositioned. Okay, next sheet. Wagaman Middle School. This is based on the information that staff shared with us. 28% classroom space occupied. This is in the HUD Choice Neighborhood Planning Grant area. Our team, most of the folks, this had really good access on Germantown in proximity to 35 West. And city manager had mentioned a couple of things about other activities here. Now, not directly adjacent to Wagaman, but there's an incremental effort here to actually reimage and reposition Germantown. And there were two major projects that have been done recently. One is the Germantown Village, which is at the northeast corner of Broadway and Germantown. That was a project that was done by the Model Group. And the Hawthorne Village, which is a little bit further, closer to town here, which Greater Dayton Premier Management completed here a few years ago. So there is some activity underway for the reimaging of Germantown and the corridor, and of course, everyone is thinking that anything happening on Germantown really benefits all functions on Germantown. Given its location to Dunbar, is this a feeder for Dunbar, or could this be a STEM feeder for Thurgood Marshall? There appear to be, based on what we've talked to a few folks about, there's current and potential business partnerships to bolster support and innovation at Waukegan. Could this be looked at? So when we looked at the map, I think there were 2 middle schools on the table here that were under the 50% occupancy. One was E.J. Brown and one was Waukegan. And this is just a question. Is there any potential here for consolidating with another DPS middle school or not? And then with this one, there was a thought here about expanding the park, which is adjacent to this, and include a lighted walking track. Okay, moving on to the Dayton Boys Academy. 29% classroom space is occupied. There has been a fair amount of focused energy in the neighborhood surrounding this. Roosevelt Homes 1 and 2, which resulted in the construction of quite a few new houses, and that was paired with blight removal. This has got great access. Thinking about here, you have you're near the intersection here of James H. McGee, which also gives you great access to and from 35 and West 3rd Street. A lot of folks ask questions about, is there potential here to actually improve, enhance, or strengthen this value proposition between the recreation center and functions within this? And as an example, someone had asked, is there a possibility to be thinking about the Boys Academy layering in a value proposition as a fitness academy, so that there might be some more synergy with those two facilities here. Next sheet is Westwood and WOW pre-K through 6. We actually started out having these on 2 separate sheets with 2 separate discussions, and it really came to the attention of the group that we're almost looking at 2 schools in the same neighborhood here. So Westwood is 48% classroom space occupied. World of Wonder, which is in Residence Park, which is 46%. And the question here, is there potential here for thinking about consolidation of these 2 functions in either one or the other facility here? Based on the scatter map we received at the last meeting that showed where the students were coming from, it looked like Westwood and WOW were drawing from the same neighborhoods in the same areas, so that was interesting. That was an interesting observation. And then everybody thought there could be further demographic research looking at these neighborhoods around it, because there are probably, we know there's the aging of the population. What we don't really know, this would require a little bit more research, are some of these neighborhoods having a larger percentage of seniors or aging, or does one or the other neighborhood show some opportunities for growth in birth rate and potential students here? Westwood is currently a neighborhood school center. Again, question was asked about a possible STEM school feeder for Thurgood Marshall. Everyone thought it was interesting that WOW is really only 1 block away from Thurgood Marshall. We don't exactly know what that means, but we thought that could be grist for doing some brainstorming about maybe a relationship between those 2 schools. Partnering with community and business organizations such as Wesley Community Center, Dakota Center, Sugar Creek Packing. This particular area had a lot of community organizations, community groups, and businesses, so we thought that was offering potential opportunity. Someone had brought up, what about a satellite office for jobs and family services in either one or the other, or maybe even some of these other locations? And on these 2 schools, this came up, creating dedicated safe walking routes to actually link this better with the neighborhoods around them. And there were some specific items here about targeted blight removal, cleaning and clearing overgrown lots, identifying safe zones with neighborhood partners, and a lighted walking track. Okay, moving on to E.J. Brown. 36% of the classroom space occupied. And again, this was a question that was brought up. Is this a middle school function that might be able to combine with another middle school function to maybe make one or another maybe a little bit more efficient here? We thought it was interesting that we've got Fairview close by, which is a pre-K through 6, and E.J. Brown, which is a middle school. So there's a pairing there geographically that everyone thought was pretty interesting. This site has good access to and from Main Street. And this was the first facility that folks were asking questions about, this is interesting, without getting into detail about the width of the corridors and the space there. They thought this might be worth taking a look at for possible repositioning for senior housing. Okay, next one, Rosa Parks Early Learning Center. 32% classroom space is occupied. And given that this is the Early Learning Center, there are some thoughts about could there possibly be additional wraparound services that might enhance the pre-K programming at this particular site. Yes, sir.
Is this 32% classroom space occupied, is that now a correct calculation? I thought there was something about the fact that it doesn't include the fact that a certain number of the classrooms are MBCDC Head Start.
That's correct.
So the 32% is
Just
a
DPS. It's just DPS.
Is a miscategorization
Yeah,
of
it possibly
current
is. Yes.
capacity.
Yes, that's
So we know what true current capacity occupation is?
Six.
230 students right now, and I think this is based on
38%.
And the other thing that you need to remember about Rosa Parks is they are limited. They can't have 25 students per classroom. They are limited by preschool size, so you have 16 students per classroom.
Yeah, I just didn't want this 32%
right.
to sit there in the record.
To be very clear about that, Rosa Parks has only about 2 classrooms that do not have Head Start, not Head Start, but preschool programming in those buildings, in those classrooms. Yeah. They only have a couple. They have 4 kindergartens and 2 empty classrooms that have equipment in it, for example, bicycles, tricycles for the students to do physical therapy, that sort of thing. So it's really not a building that is empty.
Yeah.
It's not a vacant, right. Yeah. Thank you for asking that.
Okay, next page, Meadowdale Pre-K and Meadowdale High School. Based on the information we had from staff at Pre-K through 6, looked at it, it was about 37% classroom space was occupied 43% for the high school. I think there were some questions here that folks were asking is what is the relationship? Is there a feeder function of the pre-6 to the high school? And is the proximity of these schools has the value proposition or the ability to maximize the value been leveraged with that? And then this was another area where we thought some demographic analysis of the neighborhood surrounding it could be helpful to find out what's going on with the aging of the population, school-age children. And I did want to mention, if you flipped back a couple of sheets here, it doesn't matter which one you pick, if you see the yellow stars on here, those are faith-based institutions.
Okay, thank you.
And you will see that there is a very high concentration of faith-based institutions in the core of the southwest area here. And of course, each one of these probably are different sizes and have different potential capacity opportunities for partners. Thank you.
Thank you for that presentation. I think we have some questions. Brian.
Who was the makeup of this group that came up with these recommendations and who was discussing this?
These were again, the staff from the city, so it was planning, economic development, and citywide development who are working the asset development strategies, implementing asset development strategies, who actually drove around the schools, did the collection of information.
Good question. Thank you.
The other question that I have is that, for one, this report is very informative and visual. Thank you for that. And it does delineate the forward-thinking plans given the fact that these schools are going to be closed. And should that be the realization of the action and all of this work, what kind of timeline is projected for the development or, of this innovative retrofitting of the schools should they be closed? Are we looking at a 10-year, 15-year, 20-year development?
Are you asking about the city's plans for that, or are you asking about
Yes.
the district's plans?
This report,
Okay.
let's just say, given ideal conditions, and it is decided or determined that this is a great plan and this is going to happen. What are we looking at, 20, 30, 40 year?
I don't know that this is really a plan. These were things going around the schools, so that if the school board were to choose to close one or two facilities, the task force would have information around the things being implemented and potential brainstorms for reuse. We would certainly yield, the city doesn't have plans on taking over any of these schools and actually redeveloping. It would be in conjunction, we would work in conjunction with the school board once they made a decision with regards to their asset and move forward from there. So I can't, this is not a specific plan, this is a conceptual menu.
Yes, so, excuse me, forgive me for that. I made the assumption that there would be a partnership, with this development.
That's right.
So, given all of that, let's just say conceptually, with this conceptual plan, speculation with EJ, particularly the one that talked about, retrofitting and including senior citizen residential spaces, what would we be looking at?
So off the top of my head,
Yeah, just
obviously, because
speculation.
there is no, a process like if the school board decided that they were going to close a school building, we would certainly be at the table helping them conceptualize the planning that's surrounded that. So there's a great deal of pre-development planning that would have to go into effect, looking at the layout, the architecture, looking at the market, doing market analysis to really understand depth of market for any kind of repurposing, whether it be a senior resource facility, residential facility, or any of those things suggested here. After you had that pre-development work, then you could make that would also inform as to cost, and that would inform as to how you go back to get investors, developers, et cetera. So easily you're depending on if it's a total reuse versus if it's a collaborative preschool that you wouldn't necessarily change a lot of the structure. You could be looking at 18 months to 4 years to be able to repurpose an institutional use like that. Dependent, again, where it's at in the marketplace, in the environment, and the reuse.
Shelley, the way I interpreted this was you were trying to show us in terms of an asset inventory, what each site represented. And then if we use that, given the data that we had in previous ones, we can begin to see what would be entailed. And then a plan would evolve out of that.
That's exactly right, Tom.
Correct.
Just a quick question. What is Dayton Public Schools' position on the middle schools? Two of the three middle schools have less than 50% attendance rate, and there's sort of a kind of a plethora, if you will, of different schools that offer different grade ranges. So when I look at this, Charity Adams is a school that goes all the way up to 8th grade.
Dayton Boys Prep goes all the way up to 8th grade. You have the Innovative Learning Center that starts at 6th grade through 12. And then obviously the middle schools are kind of out there with only having 2 grades. Looking at student success rate and what is going to be the district's position on what types of schools offer what grades, or is it what got us to this position?
It's a good question. We're going to let the superintendent.
One of the concerns that we have is that we have 7th and 8th graders in 7 different locations. And if you want to offer equal access to programming, we have a difficult time finding algebra teachers, for example, for all 7 7th and 8th grade buildings. It's not equitable, and it's not fair that some students go without that opportunity. So in considering that, we need to make sure that whatever comes out of this, that our 7th and 8th graders have equal access to Spanish, for example, because it's being taught in some 7th and 8th grades but not in others, because they have access to a Spanish teacher at a high school level. We need to make sure that our 7th and 8th graders have access to the higher level math. So that is a huge consideration. Do we go with a K-6, a pre-K 6 opportunity, a 7th and 8th grade opportunity, and fill up all the middle schools with 7th and 8th grade? Do we go with the 7 through 12 in our high schools and fill them up? That's all part of this whole process. And making sure that we have equitable middle school education in all Dayton Public Schools. Because that's one of the issues that has caused us to look at this right-sizing process.
Tom?
I think that reinforces one of the questions that was raised at meeting number 1, in that it would be helpful for us to really understand what the academic plan is, so that the facilities plan can be in concert with the academic plan.
If you'd like me to tell you what I believe the academic plan should be, I believe that the academic plan should be K to 6, 7, 8, 9 through 12. Because at that point,
that's not what I mean.
Because then you can focus in on what a 7th grade, 8th grade education looks like, as opposed to what a 7 through 12 education looks like academically. You can focus your teachers, you can focus your professional development that's related to that adolescent age. All those resources would be focused in on that.
I understand that completely. What I'm saying is, at meeting number 1, the question was surfaced, is there a formalized academic plan that exists? And the answer was yes.
Strategy.
Yes.
And the request was made to have that plan so that we could try to figure out how it overlays with what the facility needs are, so that our task is a little more balanced with how those two things are in concert.
I'm not certain what you need as far as an academic plan. We follow the Ohio Department of Education curriculum. We have certain software that we use across the board. What exactly would you like to see presented? Because the academic plan is basically the Ohio Department of Education's curriculum that is a K to 12 curriculum.
Tom, are you referring more to the strategy, the overall, the strategy that was put together? Strategic plan that we have put together? Okay,
well,
sure.
What I'm trying to understand is how you're implementing education across the community, so that we make sure that as we're talking about facilities, we don't create an unbalanced impression of what that implementation needs to look like. That's all.
Right. I think the strategy was handed out last time.
Was it?
Yeah, I believe it was. It was. It's on there.
Oh,
Tom.
Then I owe you a huge apology.
Not a problem.
I was not. I owe you an apology because I was not at meeting number 2.
It's okay. Now I will tell you, it is.
Then I need to follow up and find out how I obtain the information from meeting number
Not a
2.
problem, Tom. And I will say that we do have a new board that's looking at the strategy plan right now, and ways for us to make it fit a little bit better. Some of the goals and as outlined from 2011 are a bit outdated in 2018. So please read it with a grain of salt. We are working on it.
Okay, well, so let me be on record apologizing.
No, it's not a problem,
I didn't
sir.
have that information.
It's okay. Thank you, Tom.
But well, what I want to add, though, Tom, to your point, though, and what you touched on earlier about, your thoughts would be a K through 6, 7, 8, 9 through 12. I think that is very valuable to know what is that future direction, because what schools stay open, what schools may close, the size of those schools, that's all going to be the redistribution of children. So that would be something to understand from a facilities perspective, if that's the strategy for the district to take that approach. That's where I'm kind of struggling. I mean, all this is great, but if there's no, right now it seems like we're kind of all over the board in terms of how students are spread out in terms of and we touched on this in the first meeting, that the success rate of students just beyond education, the age levels that they're in school with, the impact that that has on their success, and that if you have students, a set of students in Dayton Public Schools that went through 7th and 8th grade, how do they compare to students who went to a school that was 7th all the way through 12th grade? And just trying to understand those dynamics, I think that would be valuable to know. And just sort of
I think what I'm hearing is that there's a question about the configuration of your learning models and how they fit within the chart that you have devised.
That's clear.
And one of the things that we wanted to have input from the group on, as well as from our parents, because we are still meeting with our parents, and then of course we have the 2 large community meetings that are coming up. We wanted to hear what they had to say about it, but you can't focus your services, you can't focus your curriculum, you can't have the expertise that you need whenever you're spread into 7 different areas. Especially at a middle school level, because middle school teachers have a 4 to 9 licensure, and to make sure that you have middle school teachers who understand how to teach content area reading and reading, how do I learn to read, you end up with a mixed bag. And also focus on the adolescent student that you're serving. If I'm in a large configuration and I have this small number of middle schoolers, I'm focusing more on the larger population than I am on the smaller population. And that's been the uneven results that we've gotten from our middle school test results. It's also an uneven result that we have because we can't staff them equally. When you're in a high school, 7 through 12, you might have access to an algebra teacher, and you may not have access in a K through 8 building. Because you just can't find that number of teachers. So that's what we're actually trying to look at and make sure that academically, as well as socially and emotionally, we're serving the students the way that we should be serving them.
Richard?
Just a question then. Is there then, from the point of view of that, we won't call it an academic plan, but a grade structure plan, for your ideal grade structuring plan, is there an ideal number of buildings associated with a 7th and 8th grade focus, a 9th through 12th focus, a pre-K through 6th focus? So that, is there, from that point of view of that particular plan, is there an optimal number of middle schools given your desire to create equity in 7th through 8th grade? Is there an optimal number of pre-K through 6 schools? Separate from their location, is there an optimal number of those? So, and if you've done that calculation, it would be nice to see that.
I think we have to look at the number of students that are in all of our 7 through 12 buildings, as well as our K to 8 buildings. And in looking at that, excluding Stivers started as a 7th and 8th grade program. If you exclude Stivers, those students that attend all of the different configurations, they would fit into 3 7th and 8th grade middle schools, if that's the direction that we end up going as a district. And there would still be a bit of space for additional students if we needed that.
And what would be, separate from that, then what would be the optimal number of buildings in which to fit the pre-K through 6, given some plan around 2 large pre-K locations? Yeah, has somebody done that calculation?
No, we haven't looked at that, but in looking at the numbers that you have with 50% capacity, you could guesstimate that we're looking at a couple of buildings that could sustain, that could be combined into the other buildings that are partially full. But there's not a target number. We're not saying we need to get down to this number of elementaries or we need to have this number of middle schools or anything like that. We are just trying to make sure that we have the best opportunities for our students, and that's why we've asked for the input from such a variety of people.
If there are no further questions, I think we're ready to go to the small group sessions. It looks like there's 20 of us, right?
Let me
Go
add
ahead.
one other thing too. Yeah, Dr. Stock's question. Of course, one of our goals, too, was to try to find out how we can attract more students coming back.
That's right.
So that's going to have some effect in terms of where we are. And we hope that we have a situation where, you know, we're building more schools eventually. But realistically, looking at trying to increase, I don't know, 10, 20% maybe. But I think that's a goal.
I think we're just going to count off by fours, and then we'll break the groups that way, if that's okay. And I'll start, and I go to my left. 1.
4, 1, 2, 3, 1,
2,
3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1,
2.
3.
4.
All right.
Perfect.
So
Facilitators.
we have facilitators.
Dr. Roberson will take the number 1s, and Dr. Burton will take the number 2s.
She's a 3.
She's a 3.
I'm sorry, she's going to take number 3s, sorry. And
I'm a 1.
you're going to take all the...
Ones.
Well, he's got all the ones
Oh,
also,
well.
so how about you take...
We'll share.
You'll share?
Yeah.
Okay,
And,
I got 4s.
All the 4s?
Yep.
So are we missing 3s?
That's all that's
Sheldon?
left.
No, I'm with Dr. Burton.
She's with Dr. Burton, so Dr.
You're
Burton 3.
Okay,
Right.
so Dr. Burton's 3, Dr. Roberson's 1,
You want to get 2?
I'll take 2s,
All right.
Jeff will take.
and Jeff takes 4s.
All right.
Okay, thank you.
We'll give you about 25 minutes to report back to the larger group. We can move tables as you see fit. And just to be clear, there is a second sheet with questions that we want you to answer. I'll read these questions out loud for the folks who are sitting in the back. The questions that we're asking is, what suggestions or ideas should the superintendent consider before recommending anything to the Board of Education? What are your current concerns about any buildings or any potential closings? What factors do you consider to be the most critical factors about the building? And the lastly is the catch-all other information that needs to be shared.
Okay.
About 3. Oh, right here. Okay, 3 right here. You're a 3? 2. All right. 4 of us.
All right, all right. All right, thank you all for doing that. As we get back to our seats, I hope each group picked a leader to report back to us. We will start with group number 1. I think Mr. Roberson is reporting back on the questions.
Do we want to go all of them or just hit a few?
Give us the highlights of what the group discussed, and if you have something written, please turn that into the superintendent, okay?
Okay. I'll start with question 1. It was said, what suggestions or ideas should the superintendent consider before recommending anything to the board? And our group felt strongly that one of the biggest considerations should be which building has the greatest opportunity for repurposing and what can the community get out of it. So we wanted to make sure that the community is going to be taken care of. The other thing we talked about is that we needed to really change our messaging, talking about repurposing versus closure. Because the closure gives a kind of a negative connotation. So we're talking about repurposing, so we want to change our language for that. We also talked about the potential for growth in the neighborhoods need to be considered. We talked about, for question number 2, what's the effect on students and teachers when you're talking about repurposing or closing or shifting students to different buildings? We felt we need to really take that into consideration. How does closing a building impact our current inventory of vacant properties? So are we going to drive up costs of trying to maintain all these vacant properties? So what's the impact on that? And we also talked about timing. And how can we mitigate the uncertainty in the community and also the uncertainty with the staff. And I'm gonna hit one more that I think is really important, and then I'll let group 2 go. We talked about this collaboration being a very good thing, so we wanted to make sure that we continue with the collaboration, not just now, but when these buildings, when we do repurposing, we need to make sure that we maintain collaboration with all stakeholders, the city, the community, faith-based groups. This collaboration should not end because we want to make sure that we do things to strengthen the community. And then I'll let other.
Who's reporting back for group 2? They all leave? Richard, were you? This is like a classroom.
Okay. All right.
Just like a classroom.
So Richard and the other folks, I'm going to ask you to join in here only because I was riding a one-trick pony. And the one-trick pony here is when the day is done. All of these issues are really about we should be striving to achieve academic performance and excellence in what we, and I'm just making comments here on the one-trick pony is, yes, the facilities are important, but when the day is done, it's not about trying to keep a facility open for other reasons. This is about what you can do to make sure that you've got equitable resources applied to all of your facilities and you want to achieve academic excellence and performance. Now, that being said, I know Richard had a lot of comments to make, and I did want to make one point here on this too. Richard asked the question on that little brainstorming thing we did, why were all these schools in West Dayton? And I said, all we did was take the one sheet that showed schools below 50% the occupancy. That's all that drove it. And with our group, that put that together, one of the questions we asked is, did we build too many schools in West Dayton to begin with? And of course, that's, looking backwards, doesn't really matter here. So Richard, I'd like to.
I think the really big thing that got discussed
That's right.
Yes.
So
That came up in our group as well.
So the importance of that is that that is really not just about the equity of building closings, west side versus east state, but as a result of whatever.
Mic on, turn the mic on, Rich.
Sorry. As a result of whatever decision gets made, is there equity with respect to the allocation of those academic resources? So do we have a higher percentage of permanent substitutes in West Dayton buildings,
we
for
do.
example, as opposed to, yeah, I know, but
Right.
The end result is, do we have as many well-qualified teachers in West Dayton buildings as in East Dayton buildings? Those types of questions become the critical questions, which was discussed in our group. I think that was the big other element.
Okay.
Yeah,
Anything
we
else?
didn't really get past question number 2. We were very focused.
All right. Who's reporting back for Group 3?
Well, maybe we're a little more of high achievers. We got through question 1. For question 1, we think it's important to consider what the system-wide impacts will be of each individual decision, identify within those the advantages of a consolidation. Could it be fuller schools, more permanent teachers? We think it's important to go back and look at the guiding principles that were just touched on earlier. I mean, this is about the student success at the end of the day and what's going to lead to that. It's not just about facilities. Question 2, what are your concerns about any building or potential closing? What is the transportation and i.e. accessibility impact, and what are the budget impacts of making those changes? Permanent closings need to have some elasticity to them to respond to unanticipated changes down the road that could impact the enrollment. We need to have those in place and look at a strong, viable reuse of vacant structures. The priority should be on the betterment for current students and what they need. And then focus on what the attraction could be to get more students in the district. What other factors you consider to be most critical? The cost to operate of the buildings, the equity of instruction across the buildings. Are there characteristics of buildings that add to the impact of the academic performance? And finally, for other information we feel needs to be shared, the impact, obviously, as we stated earlier, to community, and scoring buildings on condition, operating costs, and academic performance, and look at all of those together and how they may correlate.
Thank you. All right. Group number 4.
Okay, I was taking notes. This still on? And by the time I finished taking notes, I looked up, everyone had gone. So I guess I'm the
They left you.
I'm the person that's reporting out. Easily, we sort of looked at ours, and we almost pretty much grouped these together. We just started brainstorming on one, but all of them are specific enough to for us to know where they came from. First one, what is happening in other cities that have been confronted with these same issues? And need to make sure we get data, because there are things that's happening. We're not the first city, of course, that's going through this.
Which is a nationwide issue,
right,
actually.
It's a nationwide issue, so
Yeah.
we should not feel embarrassed or shamed because these things are happening, because they're happening every place. So getting the kind of data from those locations and how they have made those things work or not work based upon the adjustments that they've made. Another point is to look at whatever program that's put in place based upon the decisions of the board, to make sure that those programs are truly supported. Sometimes we have themes of certain schools, but those themes do not have any more support or resources than a school that does not have that same theme. So to make sure that the theme of that particular school is truly supported.
So what you're saying is, if it's a STEM school, make sure it's a STEM school.
Exactly.
If it's okay.
Exactly.
Perfect.
Appreciate that.
Right.
Then utilize the population grids and the maps to determine, again, where our student population may happen to be, and how that works. And then, of course, we had that discussion earlier to take in consideration what it's going to take to generate potentially more students, and then look at that as well. How do value-added characteristics of each schools contribute to enrollment/achievement? We looked at the grid, for example, and we have a high number of students who are coming from across town on the west side going to Belmont. And some people may or may not know that Belmont has one of the better ROTC programs, which involves 23% of the entire population of the school, And within that group, they have 100% attendance, 100% graduation, et cetera, et cetera. So all the positive factors are very, very much up in that particular area. And then to look at, exit interviews with parents and students to ask, why did your child leave, and what would it take to bring them back? And then do some real good analysis with regards to that kind of data for future plans in terms of helping the district. And then the last one was to look at the Ludlow 1 and Ludlow 2, and just what are the options that you have in terms of dealing with that particular building for the district. We know it's a big cost, but also look at what options you have. I think there's one last thing, and this is overall, in terms of always keep in mind the what's working research as far as education is considered or concerned, to make sure that things that you're doing that are pretty much aligned, that have been able to produce good results as far as student achievement is concerned. So that's it.
Thank you, everyone. Are there any last comments out there before we close it? Please turn on your mic. Sorry. Yep, there we go.
It's been stated that there are properties that are owned by DPS that are either being considered for sale and or demolished. Has it been stated, or is it known what is the status of those properties?
So we published that information in the first meeting. There are 24 vacant properties that we have that have no buildings on them that were demolished or have been vacant for a long time. They were listed last year for sale, and unfortunately we did not get any takers. We have 4 vacant buildings at this time as well, and I will let the facilities folks answer that if you guys have a second. We don't have any bids as of right now, if that's your question. We do not have anybody with bids. We will probably relist them sometime soon, and hope that the work that we've done has elevated folks to take a look at those properties.
We still maintain them, so we mow them and we take care of them so they're not unsightly in the neighborhoods. But we do still have that number of properties with no current bids or even, we have one inquiry, and we're working on that, but that's all.
Is the maintenance cost significant and factored into the overall financial condition of the district?
Yes.
Yes,
Yes.
and I think one of the things that our group talked about that maybe didn't get mentioned is to make sure whatever consolidation plan we come up with keeps that in mind, because these buildings are costly. Even the vacant ones that were torn 20, 30 years ago, we're still taking care of them today, and we don't have a separate fund for that. That comes out of general fund as of right now, which drains our general fund, which doesn't go right. So thank you for that question. With that said, Jeff, you want to give any closing remarks? Or?
Yeah, just one other real quick question we had also in terms of taking a look at if we decide to, if the district decides from a recommendation to look at Ludlow 1, Ludlow 2, the issue of whether or not the deed, if you will, could be divided to the point where you could sell one and still maintain the other, to take a look at that particular process to see how that works for you.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you for that.
Yeah. Other than that, I think as the good reverends would say as they get ready to dismiss church, all minds clear. We really appreciate all the input that we've had so far. Any additional questions? Yes, sir.
I would like to say one thing, that I'm much appreciative of the information that we received from the city, and I would hope that we would hold on to that information so that that information will be available to community stakeholders and not just thrown in the trash after the task force is over. I'm particularly interested because you talked about the area in which I minister and the potential areas that improvement around that area. So bring us some money and we'll get things started in my area and other areas in the city. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
And again, I think that's very appropriate because this is as someone mentioned earlier. They asked the time frame for accomplishing any set of recommendations that we have, and certainly that depends on a lot of different factors. So this is not going to be a partnership that's going to dissolve after we finish with this set of issues. It's going to be something that's going to be ongoing. So we will continue to update the information that we have from the city based upon certain things that we do, And likewise, I'm sure the city is going to be a partnership with us as well.
Let me thank each and every one of you for what you've done over the last few weeks and all the input that you have had. It's been a tremendous learning opportunity for all of us. Just a reminder, we do have 2 larger meetings planned for the community. Do we have the locations for those and dates and times?
The first meeting for the community is on Thursday of this week, and it is at Meadowdale Elementary. It starts at 6 o'clock. The second meeting is on, I believe, February 28th.
28th. Yep.
At 6 o'clock at Edwin Joel Brown Middle School.
So one on the 26th and one on the...
One on Thursday, which I
Thursday.
believe is the
22nd,
22nd,
sorry.
and then one on the 28th, Shelley?
Yep.
Yes, one
That's
on the
correct.
28th.
So,
And I too would like to thank all of you and look forward to our continued partnership as we work through issues with the school district and as we continue to seek guidance and advice. You're important partners to all of us, so we hope that we can continue the relationship, and I appreciate your time and the input that you've given us. Thank you.
We only kept you 5 minutes over. Thank you very much.